Larry, a young man, recently proposed to his girlfriend, Karen. I went with him to meet her parents, only to find out her father was the famous owner of a brand store. This made Larry nervous, knowing Karen came from a prominent family, but he managed to answer all of her father, Michael's, tough questions confidently. However, things took a turn when Michael found out I only finished middle school. He slapped Larry right there. I was furious at how he looked down on us just because we didn't have the same social status. I told him we'd meet again, and then Larry, Karen, and I left for the hospital. On the way, I told Karen I would confront Michael about his actions. Her response made me even more determined. The next day, when Michael realized who I really was, he was shocked. My name is Kevin, and I'm 65 years old. Ever since my wife passed away, I've been living with my son Larry. Since retiring, my legs have weakened, and I can't walk for long periods. I use a wheelchair at home and rely on Larry to help me move around. Despite being 30 in the prime of his life, Larry cares deeply for me. We hired a housekeeper to help, but Larry still takes the time to push my wheelchair, even on his days off. I'm always silently grateful to him. Then came the big moment. One night, after coming home from work, Larry shared the news that he had proposed to Karen. The news was so overwhelming, it almost made me drop my tea. Larry just told me he proposed to his girlfriend, Karen. I asked him what she said, and with a big smile, he made a circle with his hands and said, "She said okay, she'll marry me." I could see the happiness on his face, and it was so strong that I almost cried with joy as I congratulated him. But soon, Larry looked sad. "What's wrong? You got a yes, but you seem upset?" I asked. "It's great that she said yes, but now I need her parents' approval, and I'm really nervous about it," Larry replied. I remember feeling the same way when I met my late wife's parents. Her father was very strict, and it took many trees before he agreed to our marriage. Now, Larry was facing a similar challenge. To encourage him, I patted him on the shoulder and said, "I was really nervous when I asked for permission to marry, but if you're honest about your feelings, they will see your sincerity." I'm not just being a proud dad when I say that Larry is a wonderful young man. He's hardworking, helps around the house, and is well-liked because he's such a kind person. "It's a bit scary, but I'll give it my best shot," Larry decided. "That's the spirit. But straight to your successful proposal," I said. That night, we celebrated with our best sake. Karen chose a traditional restaurant for the marriage meeting, one that was wheelchair accessible, showing how thoughtful she is. Larry has excellent taste in women. Karen is truly a wonderful match. Feeling inspired, I decided to give Larry a gift to boost his courage for the upcoming proposal. While he was at work, I went with my helper to a high-end department store to find something appropriate for him. While Larry was at work, I saw a set of bowls being sold as a couple's item. But I reminded myself that Larry hadn't yet received approval from Karen's parents. So trying not to get ahead of myself, I went to a men's boutique instead. At the store, I mumbled to myself while trying to decide what to buy. Being in a wheelchair, I couldn't reach the shelves, so I asked a nearby salesperson for help. "Excuse me, could you help me see something on the top shelf?" However, the salesperson ignored me, probably because he saw my wheelchair. Thinking he hadn't heard me, I tried again. This time, the salesperson sneered and said, "We don't have anything suitable for someone like you here." I was shocked by his rudeness. Just as I was about to complain, a well-dressed man came from the back of the store, and the other staff bowed to him, showing he was someone important. He looked to be in his late 60s, stocky and stout. I approached him, hoping he would address the salesperson's behavior. "Excuse me, I was treated horribly by your staff," I began. Just then, the earlier salesperson called out, "Mr. Michael, the president," and hurried over. This man was not just the store manager, he was Michael, the president of a major menswear brand known throughout Japan. When I explained what happened, Michael asked, "Well, sir, was there an issue with the staff?" I told him again that the staff member had disrespected me when I asked for help. I expected Michael to apologize and correct the situation, but to my dismay, he just snorted and laughed. "Ha, sir, this is a high-end men's store. If you're dissatisfied, perhaps try somewhere else." I was shocked and openly showed my anger. "Can't you see our clientele are all affluent? We have nothing suitable for someone as plainly dressed as you." Michael smirked, laughing with the staff. Appalled by the treatment, I left the store in anger. Forget it, I don't need this place, I thought. I knew the brand was popular among celebrities, but this was a bitter experience. I ended up buying a different gift, but the incident at the store still upset me. I planned to give Larry the gift after a successful meeting with Karen's parents. Today, we were heading to the traditional restaurant where Karen's parents were waiting. As Larry pushed my wheelchair, I could see he was nervous. "Don't worry, Karen's parents are probably nice people," I reassured him several times as we got closer. Traditional Japanese restaurants usually have mats and cushions, but they had set up a room with chairs and a table for us. Karen and her parents were already there. But the moment I saw her father, I couldn't help but exclaim, "Oh, what's wrong, Dad?" Larry asked. "It's nothing," I replied. Karen's father turned out to be Mr. Michael, the president from the store. I hadn't realized Karen shared his last name, which is why I didn't connect the dots earlier. When Michael saw me, he nodded with a smile, which was very different from how he had treated me at the store. He seemed friendly and said, "Nice to meet you. I'm looking forward to today," inviting me to sit down. I realized he had forgotten about our previous meeting at the store. To him, I was just another customer he didn't remember. Trying to calm down, I reminded myself that today was about the marriage proposal. However, the idea of Michael becoming Larry's father-in-law wasn't pleasing to me. As the Japanese cuisine was served and we began to eat, I felt a bit awkward. Michael started a conversation. "So where did you meet my daughter, Karen?" "I met Karen through a coworker, and it was love at first sight for both of us," Larry replied. "They started dating after work and their relationship grew deeper." "You have a good eye to take a liking to my daughter," Michael chuckled. After dating Karen for a while, I learned that her father is the president of a famous apparel company. At a family meeting, I saw Larry and Mr. Michael getting along well, which was a relief. Karen, who was initially nervous, relaxed as she watched them chat. Then Mr. Michael started talking about his family history, dating back before the Showa era. He said it was his duty as the head of the Michael family to maintain their legacy. The atmosphere tensed up as he looked at Larry and said he needed to determine if Larry was suitable to be his daughter's husband. Mr. Michael was smiling, but his words made us feel inferior. I had noticed at the store that Mr. Michael was an arrogant man who seemed to think all the accomplishments of his ancestors were his own doing. As the conversation continued, Karen whispered to her father, asking him to be careful with his words. Suddenly, Mr. Michael slapped her across the face. Larry and I were too stunned to move. Mr. Michael declared that he would decide who Karen marries and warned her not to speak out. Karen looked sad with a bruised cheek. It was shocking. "Mr. Michael, sir, that was too much," Larry said, standing up for her. Mr. Michael glared at him and scoffed. "Oh, a young man dares to speak against me." Larry, looking straight at Mr. Michael, declared his intention to marry Karen, showing his determination no matter the opposition. Inspired by his courage, I also stood up to Mr. Michael, praising Larry's diligence at work and the high regard his superiors have for him. I said Larry, still in his 30s, has a promising future. "Desperate to join our ranks, are you?" Mr. Michael scoffed, dismissing us with a snide remark, but I kept my cool. I told Mr. Michael that all I wanted was for my son and Karen to be happy and asked him to bless their marriage. Then I bowed my head deeply. Larry did the same. However, Mr. Michael clicked his tongue blably and said, "Didn't you hear? I decide if you are suitable to be my son-in-law." "Dad, don't raise your voice, it's disturbing the other guests," Karen interjected. "Be quiet. Your marriage is my decision," Mr. Michael snapped back. Despite Karen's effort to calm him, Mr. Michael glared at us and criticized, "Why are only two of you here? It's only polite for both parents to come to a marriage meeting." It seemed Larry had already explained our family situation to Karen, but Mr. Michael had either forgotten or ignored it. "My wife passed away when Larry was in high school. Since then, it's been just the two of us," I explained. "We face the grief of losing family members and are here now. My role, having outlived my wife, is to ensure Larry's happiness. We're our father-son household. Such broken people shouldn't dare approach our family," Mr. Michael sneered. Larry and I were shocked by his insult. Karen and her mother looked at him in disbelief. "Please take back what you just said. I might overlook it if it was just about me, but I can't ignore an insult towards my father and late mother," Larry said, visibly angry and his face turning red. "An insult? I'm merely stating facts," Mr. Michael scoffed, taunting him further. Then, ignoring our feelings, he bombarded us with questions. "If the current project I'm negotiating succeeds, there might be a chance for a promotion to manager," Larry replied, hopeful. "And you think that's enough to marry into our family?" Mr. Michael laughed mockingly at every answer Larry gave, as if to belittle him. The atmosphere was as tense as a stressful interview, weighing heavily on us all. Karen and her mother, perhaps frightened by Mr. Michael, remained silent and looked down the entire time. I only like highly educated elites. Surely, Larry, you graduated from a decent university, right? Mr. Michael continued, sizing up Larry. I was getting angry at how he was judging us, but I knew any reaction could jeopardize Larry's chance of marrying Karen. Larry, who studied economics at a national university and had studied abroad, responded confidently to Mr. Michael's harsh questions. Karen seemed relieved by his composure, and I felt proud of my son. However, perhaps not liking Larry's confident attitude, Mr. Michael frowned and turned to me with a question. "And where did you go to university?" he asked. I had a bad feeling, but couldn't lie. Due to financial reasons, I only graduated from middle school and never went to college, I replied. At my answer, Mr. Michael's eyebrow twitched, and he fell silent. During the tense silence, Larry spoke up. Educational backgrounds still matter between Karen and me. We're serious about wanting to marry, he said. But as he continued, Mr. Michael suddenly stroked Larry's face. Larry was sent flying through the sliding doors onto the outside corridor. A passing server screamed in shock. I moved my wheelchair to see Larry with his nose swollen and red. Karen rushed over and pressed a handkerchief to his nose. At this point, I had lost all patience with Mr. Michael. "What are you doing to my son?" I'd yelled at him. Mr. Michael looked down on us with disdain. A single father with only a middle school education. I wouldn't want my daughter marrying into that. "Get out," he said. It was clear he had struck Larry because of his disdain for our family background and educational level. Filled with the urge to retaliate but prioritizing Larry's care, I knew we needed to get into a hospital due to a possible fracture. I gave Mr. Michael a stern look and asked a server to call a taxi. While waiting, I asked Mr. Michael two last questions. "Do you recognize my face by any chance, Mr. Michael?" "What? I wouldn't know someone as poor looking as you." Michael glanced at me and scoffed dismissively. "Is that so? That's too bad," I said, containing my frustration at his sneer. I didn't say anything as the taxi arrived, and with the server's help, we got in. Karen tearfully offered to come with us, so the three of us went to the hospital. On the way, Karen spoke softly. "My father has always been like this, always saying we are a noble family. It seems Mr. Michael became arrogant because he grew up in a privileged environment. Having too much wealth can corrupt people, but Karen is kind-hearted, not like you would expect from someone raised in such a way." She was still concerned for Larry, thinking about how happy they could be if they got married. But the big problem was her father. I told Karen, "We might have to face your father and it could affect you, your mother, at home." She looked at me, wide-eyed, then with determination, she said, "No matter what, I want to marry Larry. I will tell my mother myself." Knowing her feelings, I took out my phone and made a call. "Hello, it's me. Sorry for the rush, but gather everyone for an emergency." Soon after, we arrived at the hospital. Luckily, Larry didn't have any fractures and just needed some treatment. We got a medical report from the doctor, now ready to deal with Mr. Michael, if necessary. The next day, I went to a rented conference room downtown. Larry was with his assistant due to work. When I entered, many people were already there, including some older gentlemen and a woman in her 50s wearing glasses. Mr. Michael was also there. Seeing me, he looked shocked. "Why are you here?" he exclaimed loudly. As soon as he raised his voice, the others in the room glared at him. Noticing the odd atmosphere, Mr. Michael looked around nervously. "What's going on with everyone?" he asked. "It's obvious, Mr. Michael," you shouted, for he remarked. "What's more important, why is a middle school grad in this sacred place?" Initially shocked, Mr. Michael now looked at me with disdain. "I gathered everyone here urgently," I responded. "You are not an outsider," Mr. Michael shouted in anger, but that just fueled his emotions further. I smiled a bit mischievously. Is it appropriate to speak to me like that, considering I'm a majority shareholder? Mr. Michael's face turned to disbelief, and I couldn't help but laugh. "My goodness, not knowing your own company's shareholders? What a noble family," I taunted. "It's true. I own more than half of the company's shares and attend shareholder meetings. Though being in a wheelchair might make me less noticeable, I had called the shareholders yesterday to organize an emergency shareholder meeting." "Thank you for coming on such short notice," I said, bowing to the shareholders who returned the gesture with smiles. Then, looking back at Mr. Michael, who stared at me wide-eyed, he flinched under my gaze. "Thank you for yesterday. I wanted to express my gratitude by holding this emergency shareholder meeting here." Emergency shareholder meeting. Mr. Michael trembled nervously. As the principal shareholder, I've worked as an investor. Even from my wheelchair, I analyzed market trends and mentored juniors on investment strategies. The profits from my investments have exceeded hundreds of millions of dollars, allowing me to provide financial aid to numerous companies. As a shareholder, I can influence the company's management policies and participate in the appointment and dismissal of executives. I would like to discuss a proposal for the dismissal of President Michael, I said. What? Fire me? That's ridiculous, Mr. Michael exclaimed and tried to leave the room. However, other shareholders blocked the door. Last night, when I told the shareholders about the emergency general meeting, they agreed with me and proposed a vote of no confidence against Mr. Michael, considering he struck the son of the principal shareholder. Appropriate sanctions are necessary, I stated, glaring at him. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Mr. Michael began to sweat and panic. Yet he chuckled smugly, then burst out laughing. Ha ha, you think you can intimidate me? I won't let my family's legacy crumble in my generation. Mr. Michael looked around at the shareholders. If you fire me, this company is finished. Our brand stands out because of its 110-year history. I plan to merge it with another company I support. I retorted, I am also a major shareholder in another company and considered merging it with Mr. Michael's. I was prepared to use any means necessary to oust this contemptible man from his presidency. It's called an absorption merger. Your company will be absorbed by another. I told Mr. Michael, I won't allow it, as he stood defiantly against the idea of an absorption merger, knowing it would mean he could no longer be president. He became hostile towards me, saying, I won't let someone who knows nothing about running this family business take it from me. I can't let what was done to my son go unaddressed, I countered. We glared at each other, the tension in the room thick. Then, with a cunning smile, Mr. Michael pointed at me and said, You say he was harmed, but do you have any proof? It's rude to accuse someone without proof. You won't be easily forgiven, even if you apologize on your knees. He then loudly asked the other shareholders, Have any of you seen proof from Mr. Kevin? They looked at each other and shook their heads. I had only informed them verbally of the situation. Nobody had any proof. Then Mr. Kevin's claims must be false, Mr. Michael concluded, as the room began to murmur and suspicious glances were cast my way. Confident he had turned the situation around, he gloated, You almost deceived everyone with your lies. I should sue you for defamation and get a hefty compensation. As he approached me, still silent, he taunted, Why don't you say something? Or perhaps you do have proof? Yes, I replied. I prepared something special. I had set up a projector in front of the screen and connected it to my cell phone. I've obtained special cooperation for the agenda. I will now play a video, I announced to Mr. Michael and the others. I then played the video stored on my phone. Displayed on the screen was a scene of the Michael family and my family having a meal together. The footage was shot from an overhead perspective, clearly from a security camera. When Mr. Michael realized he was on camera, he started to panic. What is this video? When did you get this? He tried to approach me, but the shareholders held him back. I had anticipated this and secured the evidence in advance. In fact, after sending Larry to the hospital yesterday, I went back to the restaurant. I explained to the restaurant owner and the waitress what had happened and managed to get the security footage from them. Did you bribe the restaurant? What a low move, Mr. Michael exclaimed. I'm not so naive as to stay silent after my son was attacked, I retorted. The video continued to play, showing the moment Larry was answering Mr. Michael's questions before being struck by him. The shareholders gasped in shock. In the video, Mr. Michael was seen yelling, a single father with only a middle school education. I wouldn't want my daughter marrying into that. Get out. Then the footage showed us leaving for the hospital by taxi. However, the video didn't end there. While Karen, Larry, and I were on our way to the hospital, Mr. Michael and his group were still at the restaurant. His expression tensed up as he watched. Stop this video now, he yelled at me, but I ignored him and turned up the volume. In the video, Mr. Michael was reproached by his wife and then slapped her. Silence. As my wife, you obey without question. I won't tolerate back talk from you, the company staff, or those pompous shareholders. You're all just pawns to me, he declared. The video ended with his wife sobbing, and the screen went blank. Silence fell over the room, and nobody spoke. Mr. Michael stood pale-faced in front of the screen. That was the evidence video of President Michael hitting my son. Oh, and the last part was just a bonus, I said with a smirk. Now, you can't deny it happened, I continued. Mr. Michael, trembling, turned to face the shareholders. Ah, he squeaked, stepping back in a pathetic manner. The shareholders glared at him fiercely, ready to act. With the proof presented and his disdain for the shareholders revealed, Mr. Michael found himself cornered by everyone present. You insulted the people who fund you? You know what happens next, right? Mr. Michael's face contorted as he began to unravel. One can only imagine what happens to a company once its shareholders turn their backs, I added with a smirk. Even the vast wealth of the Michael family would be severely hit if the shareholders collectively abandoned them. Moreover, if the incident with Larry and Mr. Michael's harshness were exposed externally, it would damage the company's image. Client transactions might also be withdrawn. Okay, I understand, I concluded. I'll increase the dividends for everyone, so please forgive me, Mr. Michael pleaded, putting his hands together in front of the shareholders. But they were furious. We can't forgive someone who's insulted us behind our backs. Please, I'm terribly sorry, forgive me, he kept apologizing, surrounded by the majority of people now forcing him into a humble posture. Usually bold, he quickly cowered when his position weakened. Seeing this, I realized that this was the real Mr. Michael. Raised in privilege and pampered from birth, he had lost any sense of gratitude. He used his ancestors' prestige to look down on others, living luxuriously and complacently. Mr. Michael had struck Larry without knowing I was the principal shareholder. This was the result of his choices. Unable to gain forgiveness from the shareholders, he half cried, clinging to me. Mr. Kevin, I am so sorry, please forgive me. Do you regret hitting my son? He nodded vigorously and knelt before me. Absolutely, I will also pay damages to your son, so please continue to support us financially. I refuse. My goal is to remove you from the presidency, I responded. We met before the marriage meeting, remember? At that restaurant we visited, he finally recalled our meeting as his face turned pale with trembling. A company that can't train its staff properly isn't worth supporting, I gave him a cold look. Out of desperation, Mr. Michael blurted out an incredible offer. Then I will give you my daughter, Karen. I have raised her strictly. She is a fine woman. Please do as you wish with her. Despite it being his own daughter, he treated her like an object, which enraged me. Don't mess with me. Children are not offerings. Anger nearly caused me to fall from my wheelchair. I apologized, but Karen wishes to marry Larry, and her will is also my will, I said. Oh, so you won't oppose Miss Karen's wishes? He asked. Of course not. I smiled slightly, and he misunderstood my forgiveness, slumping down relieved. Let's hear it from the person herself then, I called out towards the door. Come on in. As the door opened, Larry, Karen, and Mr. Michael's wife entered. Seeing the three, Mr. Michael's mouth fell open in astonishment. Why are you all here? We came together, they replied. I had asked the three of them to wait by the door until I gave them a signal. I called them in to confront Mr. Michael about their intentions directly. Seeing Larry with scars on his nose and me, Mr. Michael quickly bowed his head to Larry. Larry, I deeply apologize for raising my hand against you. I am very sorry. Larry didn't respond and turned to face Karen. My desire to marry Karen remains unchanged, but first, please hear what she has to say. Karen looked straight at her father and said, I have lived obeying your orders, grateful for how you raised me, but now I choose to be with Larry. Karen and her mother stood side by side, glaring at Mr. Michael. My mother and I are leaving the house and will cut ties with you, Karen declared. In the taxi, I had learned about her decision to separate from Mr. Michael. That's why I brought them here to tell him directly. Why? How? You're my wife, aren't you? He said, grabbing his wife's shoulder and shaking her. However, she presented him with signed divorce papers. I will not let a cruel husband dictate my daughter's life. Larry and Karen, they declared to Mr. Michael. We will get married after cutting ties with you, and my mother and I are leaving home. Thank you for everything up to now. She bowed her head, signifying their estrangement. Rejected by his family, Mr. Michael became desperate. No, don't abandon me. I've been awful, raising my hand and speaking harshly. I regret it. Don't leave me. But they looked down on him, expressionless. Seizing the moment of his isolation, I'd addressed the shareholders. Let's get back to the main issue. Those in favor of dismissing President Michael, please applaud. A few scattered claps gradually grew louder. When everyone except Mr. Michael clapped, his fate was sealed. This marks the end of your glorious life. Curse your own foolishness, someone said. Mr. Michael collapsed to the floor, weeping loudly. With that, the emergency shareholder meeting concluded. The company was then absorbed through a merger, and Mr. Michael was stripped of his executive position. Now shunned by former business associates who were aware of his brutal behavior, he found himself completely alone. Furthermore, a skilled lawyer hired by his wife exposed years of domestic harassment, resulting in a multi-million-dollar settlement. The once prestigious Michael family fell apart with his generation. Mr. Michael tried to start new businesses using the remains of his fortune, but he soon faced financial difficulties and went bankrupt multiple times, increasing his debts until nothing was left. His mansion was taken to repay debts, and all his valuable possessions were confiscated. Without work, family, or home, Mr. Michael wandered until he became homeless. One can only imagine what his ancestors, who had built such wealth, would think of him now, possibly standing by his bedside at night, whispering words of resentment. After the merger, Karen and her mother lived modestly, their spirits lifted, free from Mr. Michael's oppressive presence. Larry happily married Karen. They built a new home and invited me to live with them. Initially, I refused, not wanting to intrude on the newlyweds, but they insisted, and I was spared from loneliness. And one thing I almost forgot, I finally gave Larry the wedding gift I had been carefully saving for him.